In early August, we direct seeded some cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower in another one of our raised beds here on Oklahoma Gardening. And that is one method of getting these cole crops started as a fall crop. But if you've ever direct seeded any of these types of crops in the late summer, early fall, you know that they really take some really special care. And so another way, and perhaps a more successful way of getting some of the cole crops in your fall garden is, of course, to do some transplanting. Transplants are beginning to show up now in the garden centers across the state. And so now is a good time to go ahead and get those and get them in the garden. Today we're transplanting of quite a variety of plants, all that belong to the same family, commonly known as the cole crops, which are also members of the cabbage family. Now on this end of the bed, I'm seeding Brussels sprouts. And I'm putting the Brussels sprouts down here because the Brussels sprout is one plant that will get quite large, and it's probably the one that will last the longest in the garden. So I want it at the end of the bed where it will be out of the way when I start to take the others out. Brussels sprouts do quite well here in Oklahoma in the fall, and you probably can expect these to start producing sometime in late October, early November. And if we have a successful growing season and a fairly mild fall and early winter, you may be continuing to harvest Brussels sprouts clear up to past Thanksgiving and into early December. So I'd really recommend that you try some Brussels sprouts in your garden, but keep in mind that they do require quite a bit of space. And the variety of Brussels sprouts that we're growing here is Jade Cross Hybrid, which is one that is really well suited and adapted to us here in Oklahoma. Now, another plant that we're setting in the garden today is cabbage. I've got a couple varieties of cabbage. One is Golden Acres, which is an old standby and really makes a nice cabbage for us here in the state. The other one is Emerald Cross, which is a hybrid cabbage and has an excellent head to it, and one that I think you would also enjoy if you can find that in your garden centers. Now, actually the cabbage that we're transplanting today are a little bit small. I probably should have let those grow for about 2 or 3 more weeks. But when I was planting my other crops, I still wanted to go ahead and get them out. We do have a fairly good root system on this one, however, and so I'm not really too concerned if I've got a good root system in association with the top growth on this, because I do know that it will probably go ahead and perform quite well. However, on some of the cabbage and some that I'd transplanted a little bit earlier in the morning, I found that we didn't have a very good root system at all on those. And so I'm going to have to go back and probably do some more work and to find me some better transplants. So that is a point that I do want you to keep in mind and to consider, that when you're setting these transplants in the garden, be sure that you do have well-formed plants and plants with a very good root system, because certainly that root system has to become established in order for growth to start to support the top of that plant. Also, because these cabbage plants have not been hardened off as well as my other transplants had, I'm going to be putting some protective coatings over those to give them some protection against the intense bright light that we're having today and also the high temperatures. First, I will water these in with a starter solution. I think that's a good idea, regardless of what kind of transplant you're setting, is to have a mild starter solution of a water-soluble fertilizer prepared, and to water these in with about a half a pint to a pint of the starter solution. Then after that, I'm going to make me a little bit of teepee out of a piece of screen wire and just set over these little plants to shade them somewhat. This is probably about a 25% shade, and I can put a little bit of soil around that to secure it. Not only will it protect it somewhat from the wind, if the wind becomes a problem, but certainly from the intense temperature, as well as I mentioned, the high light intensity. Well, I'll come back a little bit later and finish setting my cabbage, and already we have set some broccoli and cauliflower, another excellent crop for Oklahoma gardens in the fall. I really like to have these crops in the fall because as they mature and the nights are getting cool and the days are mild, we have such a high flavor in these crops, very high quality, not only for fresh eating but also for freezing or for other processing if you want to process some cole crops in that manner. The variety of broccoli that we've planted is green sprout. It's a variety that sprouts well, so when you take the center head out, you're going to get quite a display of side shoots from that and continue to harvest on that again up until early winter or till we've had a few severe frost or light freezes that might take it out. And then our cauliflower is the old standby early snowball. It's a quick maturing variety, one that has a nice bright creamy colored head to it, and one that I think you'll find a very delight in your garden, again, if you choose to plant cauliflower. Now what I have done is I have set my transplants, because we are in a bed situation here and I want to take advantage of all the space that I can, as I have staggered them somewhat. We need to allow about 12 to 15, maybe even 18 inches for some of these plants, depending on the size that they get, keeping in mind that the cauliflower and the broccoli require more room actually than the cabbage do, so I can squeeze my cabbage up a little bit more. But the cauliflower and the broccoli I have staggered by placing one on each side of the bed and then another one in the center, and then in my broccoli, again, one on each side of the bed and another one in the center. And so I've got about 12 to 15 or maybe 18 inches in some of these spaces of room here between the plants, so that should give adequate space for these plants to go ahead and mature. Now another plant that does quite well for us here in the fall in Oklahoma is Chinese cabbage. Chinese cabbage is a little bit different to many of the gardeners. It's a plant that would remind you somewhat of a mustard green or a turnip green as far as its texture of the foliage goes, but yet it makes an excellent plant for fresh salads and also for cooking. Chinese cabbage can also be planted by seed, but again, if you are looking around in the garden centers, you'll find that the transplants are available on the market today, and I would suggest also that you try Chinese cabbage in your garden. Now, any of these crops that we're planting today not only do well in the regular garden in the fall, but you could also enclose them in one of your plant enclosures, like a cold frame or a structure of some type, and extend those even later in the season. And you probably, if they're handled appropriately, could even have some of these crops up until Christmas by giving them some sort of a protection later on as the days get a little bit cooler or more severe in the fall. Well, I hope that you try some of these cold crops in your garden this fall, because they are excellent choices. They're really quite easy to grow from transplants and certainly perform well. Now, like in the spring garden, however, though, we do have certain pests we have to be concerned with, and so you want to keep an eye out for flea beetles and for the loopers as they begin to eat on these plants fairly quickly after we have them planted. Well, I may want to blame it on my southeast Oklahoma roots, but whatever the reason, I always like to have a few greens in the fall garden. You know, turnips and mustard greens really make an excellent addition, not only to give us some fresh leafy green vegetables for the garden, but also can really supply us with fresh vegetables way into the growing season. Today I'm going to be planting a mixture of these greens, and I've gone ahead, because we've been working here in the garden for a while and I've noticed how it's dried out on top, and I've raked this garden bed up a little bit just to bring some moisture up before I plant my seed. Now, we can plant turnip and mustard seed or collard seed about any way we want to in the garden, as far as whether we choose to do it in rows or broadcast. Personally, what I like to do is just mix my turnips and a couple of varieties of mustard together all in one bed and call this mixed greens, and then just broadcast them over the area. That way I can, when I broadcast these, I know I'm going to get a really good stand, probably more than I would like, but I can come and thin those out as very small greens and use them for fresh early in the growing season. Then as we give them more space, they of course will get larger, and as they mature, then there will be room for the turnips to begin to enlarge, and we can use not only the tops of the turnip as the greens along with the mustard, but also then the turnip root as it enlarges later on. One of the things I like about planting these is because they come up so quickly, and you can usually have pretty quick and easy success in the garden by planting some of these greens. We're going to start seeing these probably emerge in just a few days, and then later on they will of course grow very, very rapidly. But the good thing also about this particular crop is that, at least in southern Oklahoma, you're probably going to have these still producing in your garden until Christmas, or maybe even past that, particularly if we have a mild winter. Even a few hard freezes are really not going to damage these, because they'll begin to grow back out again. And certainly the turnips that will have enlarged have not been damaged by a hard freeze. Well, you've noticed that what I have done here is just broadcast these seeds in, and then I use my rake just to mix them in with the soil very well so that the seed is slightly covered with the soil, and hopefully I've got those mixed around now and covered to a depth of about 1/4 of an inch. Later on today, and I'll firm these just a little bit now to press the soil down in intimate contact with those seed. But then later on today, when we get through working in the garden, we'll turn our sprinkler on, and I will give these a good watering to soak the seed well, and also to give the soil a thorough soaking to make it in, again, good contact with that seed. Then I want to watch these and lightly water them about every 2 or 3 days until I'm sure that they have come up and the root systems have become established. And as I mentioned on the cole crops that we've planted on the other end of the bed, these are going to be attacked fairly early in their life stage by some of our insect pests. So keep a close watch out for flea beetles, particularly on your greens crops. And then later on, as they get larger and the nights begin to get cooler, then you want to be sure to pay particular attention for aphids, because they also really attack these crops. Well, you know, we're really pushing some of the dates now to get things in the fall garden. There's a few more things we can plant later on, and such as spinach and a later planting of turnips, for example, and also radishes.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.